Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 5th of July. Today we have some updates, so let's start. And today we will start with Kharkiv area. As you can see, the Russians are shelling this area heavily. But they reduced their shelling on the line between Stary Saltov and Rubezhnoye. If you remember, a few days ago the Ukrainians were forced to leave this coast, this bank of the river, on this side of the Seversky Donetsk river, and after that, as you can see, the Russians stopped their offensive operation, stopped their shelling, and I understand that maybe for the next few weeks or maybe week they're planning to just to stay on this position without moving further. But if we take a look at the central part, like on the north from Kharkiv, we see that this area is under very heavy shelling, and the Russians are trying to return all their positions that they lost during the Ukrainian offensive operation. If we're talking about this road, M20, as you can see according to this map, the Dementivka is under the Ukrainians, but we got some reports from the Russian sources that this town is under Russian control. But if we take a look at the Russian sources map, we see that this town is in the gray zone. Another line of attack is on the line from Slobozhansk, Borщевka, Russkie Tishki, Cherkassky Tishki, this line. There is no changes from both sides. The only update that Borщeva, according to the Russian sources map, is under the Russian control, this one. But if you take a look at this map, we see that this town is still under Ukrainian. The very heavy bombing and so on. There is no updates on the area between Kharkiv and Izum bridgehead, to be more precise, between Kharkiv and Lysychansk, Slaviansk, Kramatorsk agglomeration. There are some updates from Slaviansk bridgehead. First of all, today some place in Slaviansk was shelled heavily. According to information we have, the marketplace in this town was shelled, and some sources say about some casualties from this town. So there are still a lot of civilians in Slaviansk and Kramatorsk. As I can see, these people are not planning or are not going to leave this town. We see the same picture in Slaviansk and Kramatorsk as we saw in Lysychansk, that the people are not leaving the town. And maybe they don't want to leave because they have already accepted the situation that sooner or later these towns will be captured by the Russians. I don't know. The main clashes in this area are on the line between Dibrova and Dolina, this one. The Russians are pushing heavily on all over this front line. And as you can see according to this map, there is no updates, no changes, but if we take a look at the Russian source map, there is one important update in this area. The Russians took one small village, and this is one of the most important villages in this area, Mazanivka, this one. You see that they moved their green line, this one. This territory is not colored in red yet, but in a day I think that this territory will be colored. If you remember, before this line was like right along the red line, and now this green line moves a little bit to the south. Mazanivka is under the Russians. This is a very important town for one reason. If we take a look at this West sources map, you're going to see that there are very heavy clashes around Dolina. By the way, this map is not updated yet, because a lot of sources were reporting that Dolina is under the Russians, but we can say 100% that town by the name of Krasnopolye is still under Ukrainian. This one. And the Russians don't know, at least they didn't know till this day, how to establish control over this town, because without taking control over Krasnopolye, there is no way, and there is no way how to develop their offensive operation towards Slaviansk. So this is the vital town, and they couldn't attack this town from through Dolina because these positions are very fortified. There is a small river, and the Ukrainians have a very nice positions there. So that's why the Russians started their offensive operation towards Mazonovka using the forest. If you take a look at this map, you see that there are like three forest. The Russians are called the Sherwood Forest on the north, on the west, and on the southeast. These three parts. The north one is already under Russian. The west part, there are very heavy clashes right now, and the Russians are clearing this area right now, trying to push Ukrainians from this area. So they took one of the most important town, Mazanivka. This one is under Russians, and now they have possibility and to attack Krasnopolye from the back. Furthermore, they have ability to develop their offensive operation to the south towards this area, and after that towards Mykolske, or this one town Adamivka. And with help of this, they are able to get Hristisha. So this area and this town, it's already another small town, but the small town that can change the entire picture on this front line. So the Russians took control over this town. So I expect that in a day or in two, the Ukrainians will be forced to leave Krasnopolye, and the Russians will be able to develop their offensive operation from two sides, from on the line MO3 and from Sidorova towards Mayaki. Furthermore, today we got update from Slaviansk. There was a tragedy. This town, we know that the Russians started their artillery preparation of this area, and I'm not saying that it was the Russians, but this town was shelled, and few shells got into marketplace, and few civilians were killed during this shelling. So it's very bad, of course, and it's very bad. There is no words how to describe this situation. Now let's talk a little bit about Seversk. As you can see, today is Tuesday, so according to our timings, in a day or in two, the Russians should take control, or at least to cut this area from the big land. And as you can see, the Russians are doing exactly as we projected in our previous videos. They are moving, they're trying to establish control all over the most important, the road between Sporna, Ivanodarovka and Zvanivka, these towns. So there are very heavy clashes around Sporna, so I expect that maybe this evening, maybe by the next military report, this town will be taken by the Russians, and the Russians are shelling Ivanodaryevka and Zvanovka heavily. They're trying to fix Ukrainians there and trying not to allow them to send their forces like reinforcements towards Spirna. So we see that the Russians are fighting in this area heavily. Another place where there are heavy clashes, of course, near Verkhnykamensk. Today we got some interesting update about Belogorovka. Some Ukrainian sources announced that Ukrainians managed to push the Russians back from Belogorovka, and the West sources map has been updated immediately after receiving this piece of news. I'm not sure about that this information was 100% correct, because of few things. First one, that the Russian sources map at least is not updated. Of course, we can understand why the Russians haven't updated their map, because it's like it's a big loss, because yesterday they announced that entire LPR, Lugansk People Republic was liberated. It was like the words of Minister of Defense, and this morning the Ukrainians managed to return their land back. So this might be a reason why the Russian source map is not updated. But if we take a look at ISW map, they don't show this progress as well. So I'm not sure that this information is correct. And the third reason why I don't think that this information will be correct, that there is another town, Belogorovka, on the south. This one. This is one of Belogorovka in this area, and this is another one, and maybe the Ukrainians return control over this Belogorovka, because we know that there are very heavy clashes. This is the Bachmann Road, the road that leads from that led from Bakhmut towards Lysychansk when Lysychansk was under the Ukrainians, and now this road leads to nowhere. And we see that the Russians have very heavy clashes on the north. So in triangle, we can say between Zvanivo, Berestovo, Sporna. This triangle is like the epicenter of this part of special operation. So maybe the Russians somehow managed to take control over Belogorovka during the day, but later the Ukrainians managed to push them back. So we see that on this area everything is according to plan, but we'll see if the Russians are able to take Seversk, or at least to encircle or to do some dangerous situation to this town by Thursday. Another important area with heavy clashes is the area around Guldarska power plant. Today there was another confirmation that town Klinova, this one that located, we can say, in 10 kilometers right in front of Bakhmut, was taken by the Russians. If we take a look at the Russian sources map, we see that this area is under the Russians, and the gray zone, of course, is much further and much closer to Bakhmut. Very heavy clashes around Zaitsevo, this small town. Very heavy clashes. I can say, I saw videos and pictures from this area. I can say that this town is already reduced to ruins. There is no place where you can hide. There's just ruins and nothing more. So I'm not sure that the Russians are planning from Zaitsevo to attack Bakhmut, but I'm sure that the main idea and the main purpose, of course, in this area, as we discussed, to encircle Ukrainian forces on Guldarska power plant and to establish control over Kadema, over this town. If you take a look at this map, we see that, for example, Dolomit now, this map is marked as still in the Ukrainians. The Russian sources map shows that small town Dolomit is on the Russians, and this morning there was like offensive operation, maybe Reko in combat. The Russians were trying to understand if there are anybody in Novoluganska, because their main idea for the next weeks to encircle this area and to start some offensive operation towards New York agglomeration. As you can see, this area is under fire. The Russians are shelling their warehouses, with ammunition, with shells and so on. And this is the story about New York agglomeration. So we just finished the story about Lysychansk agglomeration. Now we're going, I think, in the very near future, we're going to discuss the battle for New York agglomeration. Now we're moving to Donetsk. Donetsk is under very heavy shelling. We can say that Donetsk is the capital of, in this conflict, is the capital, the main center of this conflict from the Russian side, and Lysychansk, Kramatorsk is the capital of Ukrainians in this, on this front line. And as I told you, this morning Slaviansk was shelled and few civilians were killed. And if we're talking about Donetsk, I can't tell you the real number, but much more civilians were killed in Donetsk during the shelling. And today there was a report that 10-year-old girl was killed right in front of her house and after the shelling of this area. So the situation is critical, and this town Donetsk is still under very heavy shelling, but people are there like stay, they're not leaving this, and I'm sure that they believe that sooner or later this situation ends. And also one important note about this area, about Seversk battle. Today the head of the head of DPR Pushilin announced that he repeat our discussion that we discussed a few days ago, that the forces from LPR are moved after they finish the battle for Lysychansk. Now they're heading towards DPR. I'm not saying that they're heading towards Donetsk. I'm sure that they're heading towards Gorlovka. And as we discussed yesterday about the length of the front line and so on, they were moved. These forces were moved towards Gorlovka. So I expect the battle for New York agglomeration in the very near future. So there will be like, as I think that there are going to be like 3 battles at the same time. The Russians will try to push towards Slaviansk, the Russians will try to take Seversk, and the Russians will try to encircle Ugledar power plant and to attack Bakhmut, Chasov Yar, Konstantinovka from the southeast from this area. So this is like the 3 battles for upcoming week and so on. And now let's move to our Гуляй-Поле, Орехов, Гуляй-Поле, Великая Новосиловка frontline, Donetsk frontline. Every single maps, like the Russian sources map, either West sources map, are showing that there is no changes. The front line is very calm, no problem, no shelling, nothing is there. The same picture we can say that near Kherson, with one difference. If you take a look at the West sources map, they're showing that this area is under very heavy shelling. There was some attempt by the Ukrainians to start some offensive operation. Some sources say that the Ukrainians managed to take some towns, But the Russians are saying that those towns that Ukrainians reported they took under their control is the town that were in the Great Zone, and they just came to those towns, put their flags, made a fort, and then left. So we can't tell exactly, because as you can see, the red territory is still under the Russians, no changes from on the red territory. So that's why I can't say that there is a very big progress from the Ukrainians on this front line. If you take a look at the Russian sources map, there is no even a link on this side of the front line. So they're like trying to say us that nothing important near Mykolaiv. And the biggest updates and the most important updates is of course from Donetsk and its shelling, and from Seversk area. I'd like to continue the topic about mobilization. Today in my Telegram channel I published some notes from this industrial mobilization law. So there are like few paragraphs, few notes about this law, like in the global scope, what does it mean. So you can read if you're interested in this situation. If we're talking about the Ukrainians, they also voted for some law. They took some interesting custom in the area. They announced that Ukrainians, that men, are no longer able to leave their town. So they can leave their town, but they can do this just by receiving some pass. So military authority of each town should allow the Ukrainians to leave the town. Without this permission, they are no longer able to leave the area they're living in. There was a lot of strikes, we can say a lot of talks about this law, but after a few negotiations, the Ukrainian military authorities reported that it concerns just the situation when a person are trying to change his flat where is he living, or apartment where he's living, so his official address where is he living. So we see that from two sides, people are preparing themselves for another wave of mobilizations. If we're talking about the Russians, they are preparing themselves for industrial part of this situation, because they do have some manpower. We know that they have around 1 million army. They have some silent mobilization, and they're talking about the Ukrainians. Their forces is reducing by many reasons, not just because of losses and so on. There are a lot of people who leave the battlefield and just run away from this territory. So that's why they need to understand about their reserves, because we can say that the winter is very close, and to tell the truth, I can't even imagine how parties, how the Ukrainians or the Russians are planning to run this winter campaign, because there would be a lot of differences. If you remember, we discussed every difference from winter till summer, about the roads, about the land, about everything that can be a negative factor for tank army, for heavy equipment and so on. Furthermore, there would be no green color around, no big grass, no big leaves on the trees. Everything will be very nice. It will be very easy to spot your enemy. So I can't even imagine how at least the Ukrainians or even the Russians are planning to run autumn and winter campaign this year. So we'll see. Furthermore, of course, nobody like should avoid the COVID-19, because now it's summer and we see that people there is not much cases in Ukraine and Russia with this disease, with this COVID-19, but by autumn and winter we're gonna see another wave of this disaster. So we'll see and we'll follow this situation. And that's it for today. Military Samurai channel reminds you that we condemn any kind of violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, and enjoy your day. Thank you. Bye bye.